Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to our weekly Quran Understand the Quran series, and we are going to continue Surah At-Taubah today, and from verses ayah 60 to 67. And today, brother Kia Jahed, inshallah, going to start, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Wa alaikum salam to Allah. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Rabbi shrah li sadri. Wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Okay, Bismillah. Inshallah, the audio will be better this week. I apologize for last week's audio issues, but different computer, so hopefully that is taken care of. We're continuing with Surah At-Taubah, and last week where we left off was a discussion about the hypocrites in Medina. The ayat that we're going to cover today will also cover points of discussion about hypocrisy conceptually and the hypocrites in Medina, and by virtue of that, hypocrites in general. But before that, the first ayah has to do with zakat. In fact, this is the ayah of zakat. Ayah number 60 is the ayah of zakat. Zakat was instituted very early in the Muslims' kind of time in Medina. After they migrated from Mecca to Medina and they did the hijrah, they now have a polity, they have a government, and they have an obligation, right, to help those in need. And Islam is all about helping those in need. In fact, one of the maqasid of Sharia, one of the goals and objectives of our religion is hifdul ird, preservation of dignity, right? And one of the ways that Islam preserves dignity, in addition to preserving dignity, preservation of wealth, right? So these two things, preservation of dignity and preservation of wealth, hifdul ird and hifdul mal, right? These two things, because they are overarching objectives in our Sharia, so much emphasis is placed then on uplifting people who are poor, right, and giving them dignity, and giving them some wealth to which they can now kind of take themselves out of poverty and begin the process of working up and moving up the financial ladder, if you will. Therefore, Islam has the concept of zakat, right? Now, one of the first questions that you have to ask then is, okay, well then who does Islam deem necessary to receive charity? Who does Islam say is, compatible with the reception of the community's wealth in order for them to be lifted up in dignity and for them to be taken out of poverty? There's 8 categories, and we'll begin with verse number 60 that talks about the categories of charity. Who receives charity? Who receives zakat? Okay, which is one of the 5 obligations of Islam, obviously. So the verse begins, "Innama as-sadaqat." Indeed, verily, sadaqat, which is the plural of sadaqah, which means charities. Right? Now the word sadaqah is used here, but what is meant by sadaqah is zakat in this verse. This is the verse of zakat. Okay. Indeed, verily, zakat lil fuqara. First and foremost, it is for the fuqara. Let's talk about the first 2 categories, lil fuqara wal masakin. It is for the fuqara and the masakin. Now, both fuqara and masakin can be translated as poor people. Okay, in fact, some scholars say they mean the same thing, and they're both brought together in this verse for the purpose of tawkid, for the purpose of emphasis. Okay, meaning people who have no wealth are first and foremost the most eligible to receive wealth from the community. Okay, but some people say there's also a slight difference in meaning. Faqr really is need. Okay, like Allah says elsewhere in the Quran, Ya ayyuhan nas antumul fuqara'u ila Allah. O mankind, you are fuqara. You are in need, right, of God, right? Wallahu huwal ghaniyyul hamid. Allah is independent and rich. So faqr is not just poor, but it's in need. These are people who are just constantly in need. They need everything. They need water. They need shelter. They need food. They need clothes, right? They're needy, right? So linguistically, faqr means that. Miskin comes from sakan. Sakan literally means stillness. Okay, like when you read tajweed, there's something called the sukun, that little circle on top of a word, right? What do? You stop. Stillness, right? When you get to that letter. So the miskin is someone who cannot be mobilized. They have no means of mobilization, no car, no bike. They can't get out of the city to get a job. They can't move around the city to, make a living for themselves. They're destitute. They really, they have nothing, right? And they have no means to get around, right? So they mean the same thing. Fuqara and masakin essentially mean the same thing, but maybe there's subtle, slight differences in meaning there. But these two categories are put first in the verse, and there's an essence to the category, like maybe it's suggestive of those who are most in need. A lot of ulama have that opinion, right? And then the third category is وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, right? And the amilin alayha are the people who work for the sake of charity. So these are the people who work in ICNA Relief, Islamic Relief, Zakat Foundation, all these different charitable organizations. Of course, these organizations will not work unless there are workers within them. These workers within them, right, are dedicating their time for the sake of charity, and they're not working other jobs. Because of that, therefore, their compensation is necessary, right? Financial compensation is necessary. Now, one of the things that Ibn Ashur says about this verse in his tafsir is Allah could have used essentially any preposition after the word amilin. Allah could have said, وَالْعَامِلِينَ لَهَا وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَنْهَا وَالْعَامِلِينَ biha, right? But Allah said, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, which is ala plus ha. Ala is a preposition in Arabic. It's a participle, what is known as like prepositions in English, that means upon something, right, or for something. And so there's this idea linguistically, right, subtle points that grammarians pick up, right, in the Arabic language and in the Quran. This idea that the people who work for charity, they're not just working for it, they're on top of it, in the sense, like metaphorically, they know who needs the charity. They know who the poor people in the town are. They know where the need is. And so it's not enough. Well, ideally, it would be best if the people who worked for charitable organizations were not just employees, but these were people who know the field. These are people who know the people. These are people who, they know which water well is broken, and they know, which village is the most in need, and they know the people and all those things. So وَالْمُعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا is that third category, right? وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم. Now this is the مُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم is a bit of a difficult category to understand, because it essentially means, and for the sake of bringing people's hearts into Islam, right? Reconciling people's hearts into Islam. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, towards the end of his life, after the Fathul Mecca, right? After the time where Muslims entered Mecca and they conquered Mecca, took over Mecca. After this time, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave many of the Quraysh, right, a lot of wealth, and they had just entered Islam. These are people like Abu Sufyan, and they're like, and then the people of Medina who had been with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for a long time, fought in all these battles. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't give them as much wealth, right? And they, initially were upset by that. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Doesn't it please you that they leave with this wealth, but you leave with me?" Right? And they said, "We're pleased with that." The point here is, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave some Meccans, about 39 or 40 in total, wealth from zakat, okay, without them being poor. for the sake of bringing them even closer to Islam, right? You know, when there's a sudden revolution in society and your situation changes, your position in society changes, it's very difficult. You know, this wealth that, you know, zakat, that the Prophet Muhammad was giving them, it was a means of making them more sturdy as Muslims, right? And not allowing them to just jump in and out because they just come in, but it makes them more stable, right? And that was the point. Now, this continued up until the time of Abu Bakr and even the early time of Umar, but then Umar actually stopped doing this. And he said that charity, that zakat that was given to these Meccans, right? That was when Islam was weak. But now at the time of Umar, Islam was very strong. So he stopped doing it. And then this becomes a debate now for scholars, right? Did Umar and the scholars around them, because no one said anything, create a type of consensus of abrogation of this one category? There's a lot of debate about this in books of tafsir. The statement that I have found the most balanced is by Ibn Arabi, the Maliki, who said that, you know, this verse is based on an illah. This category is based on an illah, means it's based on a reason or a need. If Islam is ever in a position of weakness, right, and is in need of stabilizing people's position within it, then it could distribute some wealth for that sake. But if Islam is strong and dominant and it does not need them, then it does not need to give to them. And that's generally how people understand it. So that is the fourth category. The fifth category is fir riqab, and that's pretty self-explanatory. You know, riqab are people who literally are in bondage. These are slaves. And وَالْغَامِرِينَ عَلَيْهَا, the next category, people who are in debt, right? And those are the fifth and sixth categories. And then finally, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَبِنِ السَّبِيلِ, in the path of God. And in the path of God is traditionally understood as jihad, right? Now, nowadays, a lot of scholars have understood that as being much more general. Nowadays, where every country has sovereignty and there's borders, and offensive jihad doesn't make sense like it used to in the past, when defensive jihad is kind of where, you know, the world kind of, the Muslim world sort of understands the role of jihad and how they protect themselves. Nowadays, giving for the sake of jihad is less understood as fi sabilillah, as generally how can money be spent in the sake of establishing God's religion in the earth, right? And maybe that has to do with masajid, maybe that has to do with Islamic schools, maybe that has to do with seminaries, right? So some scholars have said fi sabilillah applies now to these things as well, because these things more than jihad will establish Islam. The whole point of the verse is how you distribute wealth to establish Islam or strengthen Muslims, right? But again, this is a debate and it's a point of differences of opinion. Wabni Sabil, the final category, literally means the son of the road, but of course that's a metaphor. It has to do with a person who is traveling, right? And someone who is displaced from their community. When you're displaced, you may not be a faqir, you may not be poor, right? But you may not have access to your wealth because of your displacement, right? And so nowadays, people's assets can be frozen. You know, they may not have a connection to the wealth back home, and their wealth may be investment, and they don't have access to the investment or something. And so these people also qualify for zakat if they've been geographically displaced. These 8 categories, these are the categories of people who are eligible for zakat. Eligibility is based on a nisab. Nisab means essentially 3 ounces of gold. Anyone who has 3 ounces, the value of 3 ounces of gold or more, they have that much wealth. They have that wealth in the bank, they have that wealth in cash, they have that wealth in assets, they have that wealth in gold, okay? They have to give zakat. And anyone who does not have that amount of wealth, right, they are considered a faqir, a poor person who can receive zakat, and or one of the other categories. If they have the wealth but they fall into one of the other categories, they're eligible to receive zakat. Faridatan min Allah. This is an obligation from God. Okay. Wallahu alimun hakim. And God is all-knowing, wise, right? These names of Allah, Al-Alim and Al-Hakim, right? They fit this verse, right? And if you pay attention, the names of God that often come at the end of verses, they complement what is being said in the verse. So you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names and attributes encompasses everything, right? Alim is all-knowing. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who needs charity, right? He knows the people who can be uplifted, right, as a result of receiving this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wise. He knows how to distribute it, who should get it. Now, there's a lot of talk in books of fiqh and differences of opinion in different madahib on how to give, right? And do you give, 1/8 to every single category? People in the Shafi'i madhab thought that that was the correct way. Or if you gave everything, for example, to a miskin, does that count? Well, people in the Hanafi madhab and Maliki madhab felt like that could also be correct. So there's differences of opinion. We're not going to get into that because we have some other verses to cover. But in general, this is the verse of zakat and who receives it, and the 8 categories where it's clarified. Then we're back to the discussion about hypocrites after this again. Now, this verse wasn't just random, by the way. A few verses before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَلْزِمُكَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Now, we don't have to go to that verse here just real quick. The hypocrites, they criticized the Prophet because of how he distributed zakat after wars, right? Because after a war, you gain wealth and that is distributed. So the hypocrites didn't get as much as they wanted. They criticized the Prophet. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala criticized them, but then this also becomes an opportunity to explain where charity is supposed to go, where zakat is supposed to go. So it's not necessarily out of context with the previous verses about hypocrites and the verses that follow after hypocrites, because it's clarifying an objection that the hypocrites had, right? Who does zakat really go to? But then we begin with verse number 61, وَمِنْهُمُ الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيَّ وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذُنٌ. And some of them, meaning the hypocrites, are those who will annoy the Prophet. يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيَّ, literally, adha is an annoyance, but it can also mean harm. Of course, these hypocrites, they're a constant thorn, if you will, in the side of the Prophet. They're constantly causing trouble. They're constantly pulling people out of the army. They're constantly causing division and rancor within the groups of Muslims. And of course, anything that hurts the Muslims hurts adha, the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But here's something else that they used to say, to kind of ridicule him. يَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذُنٌ. This is fascinating, right? This is the criticism they had of the Prophet. They used to say, he's all ears. Why would they say that? Because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had a very different character from other men in Arabian society. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to listen to everyone. And that's not something a traditional, if you will, sheikh or leader of a tribe would do. Maybe they would listen to important people, but maybe they wouldn't listen to just some young child or something like that, right? But the Prophet would listen to everyone. He had his ears, if you will, open to everyone in society. So much so that when he didn't hear about, a young child's talk of a bird that he had, right? Abu Umair, the brother of Anas ibn Malik, right? He used to have a bird, called Nughair. And Abu Umair used to talk about his bird all the time. And one time the Prophet Muhammad noticed that Abu Umair was not talking about Nughair. And he goes to him and says, Ya Abu Umair, ma fa'ala Nughair? Oh, Abu Umair, what happened to your bird Nughair? Now, why would the Prophet Muhammad even have thought of that? Because he used to listen to this young child talking about his bird, right? He would listen to everyone. In fact, in the In the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi, it says that إِذَا التفت جميعا. When someone would talk to the Prophet ﷺ, and he wanted to listen to them, he would turn his whole body, and face that person with his entire body, right? And then listen to them. In other words, he would give him his entire attention, right? So we have reports of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ being an amazing, phenomenal listener, right? And that's not necessarily how a sheikh would go about things. Maybe they would maybe give time to a really important person from another tribe, but maybe not some small child. So they ridiculed the Prophet because of this. They said, you just listen to everyone and you're gullible, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to this, and he says, Udhunu, qul udhunu khayri lakum, right? He listens for your own good. In other words, his listening is for your own good, right? And he's not just gullible, okay? Yu'minu billah. He believes in Allah. Wa yu'minu lil mu'minin. And he believes in the believers, right? Yu'minu billah wa yu'minu lil mu'minin. He believes in Allah, he believes in the believer. He doesn't believe the hypocrites. And Allah has told him who the hypocrites are. So it's a direct response to the hypocrite one, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no, he listens and believes to his Lord, and he listens and believes the believers. And because of that, وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ, he is a mercy to those amongst you who believe. وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And those who annoy the Prophet. And annoyance, again, is not how we think of annoyance. Like, you're annoying me, stop chewing with your mouth open, right? No, not like that. Annoying the Prophet, bothering the Prophet, harming the Prophet, okay, is anything that displeases Allah. Anything that displeases Allah is an annoyance to the Prophet Muhammad. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, anyone who annoys the Prophet, right, and harms the Prophet emotionally or any way, right, that person has a terrible punishment awaiting them. So let's go back to the verses. يَحْلِفُونَ بِاللَّهِ لَكُمْ لِيُرْدُوكُمْ. These hypocrites, one of their characteristics, they constantly swear. That's all they do. I swear to God, man. I swear to God. I swear to God. I swear to God. Right? They're always swearing. Well, you gotta be careful about someone who does that, right? Someone who is always swearing is overcompensating. What are they overcompensating? They're overcompensating for the lack of their own genuinity, which they know is there, right? And maybe subconsciously, because they know that's there, they're trying to constantly overcompensate for it and get you to believe what they're saying, even though they know it's not true. Maybe they're trying to convince themselves. They swear to God so much because their own words have no value. So they try to add value to it by including God, right? And so they'll say, we swear to God this, we swear to God that. We swear to God, we swear to Allah that we were with you. We swear to Allah that we couldn't have made it out to the battle because this, that, or the other. We swear to Allah that we had no intention of harming you. We swear to Allah this, we swear to Allah. There's so many instances of this in the Surah, right? And you can, by the way, you probably come across these people from time to time, right? People who, they never walk the walk. But when it comes to talking, they're willing to swear to God for anything, right? To get you to believe them, right? It's not good. And if you have the habit of doing that, constantly swearing to God, get rid of that habit. Do not bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into your oaths unless you truly, truly want to place emphasis on that thing. And that should not be something that comes every other sentence, right? Because you dilute the importance and the greatness, and you cannot dilute, but your tongue is attempting to dilute, but it doesn't really do it, the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here they do. They swear to Allah, لِيُرْدُوكُمْ, so that they can please you. Now this is speaking to the Prophet Muhammad and essentially saying these hypocrites, they're constantly saying, wallahi, 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 so that you can be happy with them. But they don't understand something. Wallahu wa rasuluhu. It is Allah and His Messenger ahaqqu an yurduhu. They have a greater right to be pleased in kana mu'minin, if they really were believers. Now something that's interesting here. Why does Allah say they swear to please you. But then after that, he says his messenger had a greater right to be pleased. Isn't he the messenger? Well, they are trying to please Muhammad the person. They don't believe he's a messenger. They're trying to please him as a leader in society so that they can benefit from their close association with him. They don't really believe he is Rasulullah. That's the hypocrite, right? And Allah is saying, if you would have aimed to please Allah and you would have believed that this is his Rasul and you aim to please him as a Rasul and not as Muhammad ibn Abdullah, that would have been much better for you, right? If you were a believer, that is what you would have attempted to do. And here the lesson for us is, if we are truly believers, okay, doesn't matter who's in power, it doesn't matter who the leader is in society. We don't aim to please people above us just because they're above us, just because they're leaders, just because they have power. We only aim to please Allah. That's it, right? In a very important hadith, Rasulullah says, whoever pleases Allah at the expense of displeasing the creation, Allah will be pleased with him, and Allah will eventually make the creation pleased with him as well. But whoever displeases Allah, trying to please the creation, Allah will be displeased with that person. And then Allah will make the creation eventually displeased with him as well. It's a lose-lose situation. It's either win-win or lose-lose. If you aim to please Allah, it's win-win. You win the dunya and the akhirah. You win Allah's pleasure. You will eventually win people's pleasure. Okay? But if you aim to please people, it's a lose-lose. Right? And that's an important lesson that we can take from this as well. Alam ya'lam. Allah says, Alam ya'lam. Don't they know? ألم يعلموا أنه من يحادد الله ورسوله فأن له نار جهنم. Don't they know that whoever, right, yuhadid, it means challenge or oppose, right? Whoever challenges or opposes Allah and his messenger, that person has hellfire waiting for them forever, right? ذلك الخزي العظيم, and that is the greatest humiliation. These hypocrites, okay? These hypocrites, they were opposing Allah and his messenger, thinking that, right, Islam is not going to rise. And therefore, real dignity is on the side of the Quraysh, for example, right? But ultimately, anyone who opposes Islam is going to lose their dignity. And they are going to be humiliated, either in this life or in the next life, or both, right? And anyone who opposes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and anyone who opposes the deen of Allah, right? No matter how they attempt to do it, that is a one-way ticket into hellfire. يحذر المنافقون أن تنزل عليهم سورة تنبئهم بما في قلوبهم. The hypocrites, they're constantly worried. Okay, this is fi'al mudari'. This is the present future tense indicating continuation, right? They're constantly worried. Yahdhur is to be worried or to be afraid, right? The munafiqun, they're constantly worried. And tunazzala alayhim surah, some kind of revelation, surah, is going to be revealed, right? Tunabbi'uhum bima fi qulubihim, informing them, the hypocrites themselves, of what is in their hearts. This is fascinating. The hypocrites themselves did not believe in the Prophet, right? Yet deep down inside they knew it was true. Deep down inside they knew it was true, and they've experienced that over and over again, revelation after revelation, confirming things that no one could have known, right? Revealing secrets amongst themselves that no one could have known, revealing conversations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reveal conversations to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that would happen between them. No one could have known but him. These incidents are rife throughout the seerah. And there are times when they just suddenly like, oh my God. And it would just like a flash of lightning, right? It would hit them, then the light would go away, right? And that fear, it was ever present within them, that at any moment Allah can expose them, even though they had disbelief that was covering up this this realization. In fact, that's what kufr is, by the way. The word kufr or kafir is the same idea or the same etymological root that means a farmer, someone who takes a seed and plants it in the ground. Because what is that farmer doing? They're hiding the seed. They're hiding the seed under the ground, right? So kufr, really, linguistically speaking, is not that you don't believe, it's that you hide your belief, right? Because every human being truly believes deep down inside. We were all born, right, with the DNA of Iman, if you will, okay? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُم وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ. This is in another verse, elsewhere in the Quran. Allah took from the children of Adam every single soul that would ever come from Adam. Allah took these souls in a celestial realm before this world, and He made them all stand before God. And He said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? Every single soul that would ever exist on the face of this earth said, Bala. Yes, they testified, you are our Lord. And Allah says, Shahidna an taqulu yawm al-qiyamati inna kunna an hadha ghafilin. We took this witness so that on the day of judgment you wouldn't come and say, oh, we had no idea about this, right? We didn't realize there was a God. No. Every human being now has a pre-installed iman within them, right? It has to be nurtured to grow like a tree, right? But it's there. You can hide it or you can nurture it. It's up to you. But there's no true atheist. These hypocrites, okay, they're a little bit different. They're kafirs, okay, but they act like they believe. They're hiding the seed, yet they act like they're not, right? So there's discrepancy between what's on the outside and the inside. But the seed is still there. And every now and then it's like a flash of light. It's like, oh, yeah. And they realize, they fear that Allah is going to reveal what is really within them, right? But it's just like a brief flash of light, it never continues. And this is actually a metaphor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives of them in the beginning of Surah Baqarah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then continues, قُلِ اسْتَهْزِئُوا, right? Let's go back. So let's continue with 64. Yeah, we're not finished. Continue your mockery, if you will, right? استهزئوا. إِنَّ اللَّهَ مُخْرِجٌ مَا تَحْذَرُونَ. Continue to try to mock Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by acting like you believe in Him, right? But you don't really believe in Him. Allah is going to bring to light everything that you disclose. Everything that you're worried about, Allah is going to eventually bring to light, right? And let's go to the next verse. وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ لَيَقُولُونَ. But if you ask them about this, right? If you ask them about their comments, about their ridicules, about their, kind of lackadaisical approach to their duties as a Muslim, right? Maybe they said something that was indicative of how they don't take this seriously, right? وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ لَيَقُولُونَ. If you ask them about a comment that they made, they would just say, إِنَّمَا كُنَّا نَخُوضُ وَنَلْعَبُ. We were just jesting or joking, okay, and being playful. This is just like when you talk to someone, okay, and you're talking to them about religion, or you're talking to them about God, right? Or you're talking to them about something that's important within the religion, right? And maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's gambling, maybe it's something like that. And they're like, brother, don't be so serious, and maybe they make some jest or mockery, or maybe they're acting like they're drinking, maybe they're acting like they're drunk, maybe they're just making some joke about a verse, okay? And you're like, listen, this is God's words, right? This is important. You can't do this, right? And the part of the issue with our society is, in American society, Western society in general, everything is considered fair game when it comes to comedy, right? Everything's considered fair game. And the reason is the concept of the sacred just isn't there. As Muslims, we have this concept of the sacred. What is the sacred? Let me give you some imagery. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he was speaking to Musa, when Moses alayhi salam first received revelation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, فَخْنَعْ نَعَلَيْكَ, take off your shoes. إِنَّكَ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ تُوَى, you are in the sacred valley of Tuwa. In other words, this place where I am speaking to you now, in this moment now, this is a sacred moment in a sacred place. You can't have your shoes on in here. Okay? What's on the bottom of your shoes? Filth, dirt, right? Other stuff. You have to put that aside. That's dunya. Put that aside. When you come into this realm, you take that and you put it off. You don't mix the two. Okay? This is sacred, that is secular, right? And we have this concept in Islam that this realm of the sacred, this is not fair game for joking. This is not fair game for comedy, right? This is not, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is not fair game for a cartoon, comic or something like that. This is something, right, that is sacred. And inevitably, people are like, stop being so serious, man. Why are you so serious? Why are you so serious? Like, you can't take a joke. Here's the response. The response is right here in this verse. قُلْ أَبِاللَّهِ وَآيَاتِهِ وَرَسُولِهِ كُنْتُمْ تَسْتَهْزِئُونَ. What is it that you're joking about here? You're joking about God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, right? And his messenger and his signs? Is this what you're joking about, right? This is a type of question which has an indirect, right, passive threat within it. In other words, if you are going to joke and jest about God, his religion, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and you're not going to take this, if this is just going to be another dunya thing to you, okay, then be prepared to be treated on the day of judgment for people who had no religion to begin with. This is essentially what is being said within this verse, right? We have a line as Muslims. You cannot joke or jest or insult, right? You cannot take lightly. Let me say it like this. You cannot take lightly, right, Allah's words. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that we're like super strict and just we're stiff and we can't take a joke. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to joke with his companions in the masjid. Okay? It's not like you go into the masjid and all of a sudden you can't be human anymore. No. He used to the companions used to wrestle with one another, and they used to joke with one another and play pranks on one another. And of course, yeah. But when it comes to Allah's words, Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, when he was with us, he was playful and jest and everything. But when the adhan was made and he went for prayer, it's like no one recognized him. You see, this is the balance. There's this space, okay? There's no laughing in salah. You see, it invalidates your salah, right? Why is there no laughing in salah? Because that's a sacred space. That's not a place where laughter occurs, right? And the hypocrites, they don't understand this. They think it's all fair game, right? And so that is something that a true believer sees differently, right? And then finally, the last verse, لا تعتذروا. Don't seek an excuse, right? قَدْ كَفَرْتُمْ بَعْدَ إِيمَانِكُمْ. You have truly fallen into unbelief after having believed. Even if we were to forgive you, نَعْفُ عَنْ طَائِفَةٍ مِّنْكُمْ نُعَذِّبَ طَائِفَةٍ. We're still going to chastise another group, بِأَنَّهُمْ كَانُوا مُجْرِمِينَ, right? Because they are guilty, and mujrim is essentially a criminal. They're criminals in the sight of God, these hypocrites, right? And the word criminal is a very powerful word. That's literally what it means. They're criminals. In the court of God, they're criminals, right? And on the day of judgment, they will be treated as such. Let's pause there, inshallah. If there's anything good that I have said, that is by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there's anything wrong that I have said, that's by my own shortcoming. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a better understanding of this. وَانفَعْنَا بِمَا قَرَأْنَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَ. بارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Jazakallah khair, brother. Yeah. Inshallah, we'll move to the Q&A. So the first question about zakat. Can zakat be given to non-Muslims in any of the categories?
So only one category. And again, this, if we take Ibn Arabi's, the Maliki's opinion, مُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم, right? People who they are either very, very early into Islam, okay, or they're seriously considering it. They haven't quite entered yet. These are not people who you want. It's not like these are people who you just want them to be Muslims, so you give them some zakat. And no. They're on the fence, and they're, in fact, it's not just that they're on the fence, they're even closer to being a Muslim. But you want to stabilize their faith, their newfound faith. You notice how sometimes, like, new converts, we actually run them out the masjid. They convert to Islam, and like, brother, you need to change your name, start eating biryani, start talking with an accent, all these different things. Like, what are you talking about? I don't have to do any of these things to be a Muslim, but we do these things. We run them out of the masjid. We give them a whole list of haram foods and chips and cookies and everything that they can't eat anymore. And, they're like, I can't eat food anymore. And so, the point of Islam is to, when someone becomes a new Muslim, or they're on the verge of being a Muslim, you want to make that easy for them and stabilize it. That was the point. So some ulama will say this no longer applies, this category of mu'allafati qulubuhum, to people whose hearts you want to stabilize and bring close, right? Because Islam no longer needs them. Islam no longer, if non-Muslims don't become Muslim, Islam will be fine. But early on, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it wasn't so clear, right? And so, Umar, at the time of Umar, he stopped giving this category. He said, we're not going to give to these people anymore because Islam no longer needs them. But other scholars, such as Ibn Arabi, the Maliki, he has said, no, this category of early Muslims or non-Muslims who are close to becoming Islam, who you want to stabilize their hearts. If Islam is ever in a position of weakness, right, and their stabilization within the religion will strengthen Islam, then you can give to them. But if Islam is not in a position of weakness, then that category does not apply. Other than that category, there is no other category in these 8 categories that's for non-Muslims, right? Every other category, the assumption is that they're Muslim.
When explaining this to non-Muslims from a dawah perspective, what is the reasoning that we should give? What is the Islamic wisdom behind why zakat can only be given to Muslims, except for the category that you mentioned?
Okay, so let's get a couple things straight. Zakat is different from sadaqah. Okay, so one thing that they need to understand is we're not talking about charity in general. We're talking about alms tax specifically. Okay, this this alms tax that has to do with your capital wealth that you give 2.5% of every year to these categories for the purpose of uplifting Muslims out of poverty, right, and giving them dignity, right, such that, or so that, poverty is not something that weakens the Muslim community. So the point of this is to strengthen Islam and to strengthen the Muslim community. No shyness about that whatsoever. Now, they may think, well, how come all you do is you want to give to Muslims, there's other people in the world that are in need. Well, it's like, okay, well, we're not against giving charity in general. In Florida, there's a hurricane. ICNA relief goes down to Florida to serve people who need water. Islam, absolutely, that's okay. Absolutely, Islam is okay with that, right? And that's a big dawah opportunity. So we're not against giving charity. In fact, you know, we should be giving charity. You know, in what people who need in society, we should be a charity to society in general, right? And fill those gaps and those needs, and that is a huge dawah opportunity. We're only talking about, in this sense, something that in the English language is roughly translated as alms tax. Okay, so this is a type of tax on your wealth that you give once a year, but it's not all charity in general.
Jazakallah khair. You talked about being very careful about swearing by Allah. Is it ever appropriate for a Muslim to swear by Allah? And if so, what would be some examples of situations where it might be?
So, what's not appropriate is that this is something that rolls off the tongue like every other sentence. And we all know people who talk like that, you know, because that is kind of a trait of hypocrisy, or it's even if we don't say hypocrisy, it's a trait of hollowness. Okay, your words don't have enough value in and of themselves. You have to constantly bring God in to add value to your words. Okay, but in so doing, you're almost putting God's name in vain, you know. So that's not appropriate. But for example, there are cases in fiqh, like in Surah Nur, the beginning of Surah Nur, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, like, if you suspect, you know, your spouse of infidelity, you swear 4 times by Allah, right? And for a man, the 5th one, that the curse of God is on you if you're telling a lie. And for a woman, the 5th one, that the anger of God is upon you if you're telling a lie. You know, something as serious as holding the marriage together. For example, at the beginning of Surah Nur, right? Where these ayat of qasam are being talked about. That's a case where you might swear by God, right? To prove your innocence in something. Or essentially, if you're lying, to self-criminalize yourself in the court of God, right? But for day-to-day things, you know, did you take the trash out? Wallahi, I intended to take the trash out. I just forgot. Wallahi, I swear. No, don't do that. You know, that's not appropriate. Again, that is not respecting and appreciating the place of sacredness that the word Allah holds. You know, you're just using it for like saying something about taking the trash out. No, it's not a currency that you can just like use to give yourself authority or to give yourself validity or to give your words worth and value and weight, right? It is something sacred, and the sacred has to be treated preciously, right? So swearing by God idly and for this, that, and the other, it's reflective of how hypocrites talk. So it's something we should be careful about.
And is swearing by the Quran equivalent to swearing by Allah? Because it's
essentially, yes. Essentially, because the Quran is God's word. So one of the basic points of Aqidah, for a Muslim, there are only 2 things that are okay to swear by. One is to swear by God, or one is to swear by God's words, i.e. the Quran. Okay? Now, God swears by created things throughout the Quran, right? وَالدُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. Allah swears by the duha, the early rising of the sun, and the saja at night. Saja is the stillest, darkest part of the night. 2 creations of God. He swears by both of them, right? وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا, the sun, the moon, the earth, all these different things, Allah swears by them. These are called in Sharia mu'azzam shar'an. Okay? Ta'zim is to aggrandize something, and then Sharia is just Sharia. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by swearing by certain things, He brings our attention to them, and He shows us the power of His ability, the power of His creation, and then that also is a segue into the importance of what else is being talked about in those verses. Allah can swear by those things. Those things have a certain increased value for us, like the pen. Allah swore by the pen. Nun wal qalami wa ma yasturun. Right? You have to respect the pen. Allah swore by it. Okay? Don't throw pens at your fellow classmates. Walk up to them, hand it to them with your hand, because Allah swore by it. Show the pen respect. So Allah swears by things. We have to have a certain level of awe and respect for those things that He swears by. We cannot swear by those things. Okay? Only Allah can swear by them because He created them. If we swear by something as a matter of aqidah, we can only swear by Allah or by the words of Allah, which is the Quran.
Jazakallah khairan. Inshallah, the last question. You warned us about the being careful about, joking, laughing, idle talk, things which are not taking the religion seriously. As we observe the Muslim community and some of the mistakes that you see that the community does, what stands out for you as some things to be particularly careful from your observations?
Wow, that's a great question. It's a lot of things. It could be something as simple as someone taking some delicious fruit or snack at a meal and saying something like that is the tremendous victory. And just because they're trying to say like this is so good, I feel like I'm winning, right? But that's a verse of Quran. That's not the place to put it, right? That's not the place to put that verse. Or you might have someone who is, Allah says about alcohol, for example, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Don't get near it. Allah doesn't say don't consume alcohol. He says don't even get near it. It's even a stronger prohibition than consumption, right? So obviously you can't consume it. You can't even get near it. That's the word that's used. But you'll find sometimes Muslims, they'll go to a party, they'll chit chat, hang out around people who's drinking, not feel uncomfortable about that at all, not try to get out of the situation, just act like it's no big deal. And they'll say stuff like this. They'll say, stop being so serious, right? Relax. I find that happens a lot. Now, not just alcohol, Brother Ashfaq, all kinds of things. Inappropriate gender mixing, because, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about lowering your gaze and modesty and things like that. Maybe it's something like alcohol. Maybe it's, maybe it's rolling your eye at some other legislation that Allah has talked about, such as riba. Oh, brother, come on. You don't really believe that, do you? We have to live. We're in America. See, that is, you are making a mockery. God said, prepare for battle. Prepare for war with God, right? فَأْذَنْ بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, if you want to take interest. That is not something to just be like, oh, come on, relax. So this is what I'm talking about. Like sometimes, maybe it's from a lack of knowledge, right? But with Christmas, sometimes Muslims, Christmas time, they'll go to Christmas parties. They'll exchange Christmas gifts with people, right? And they'll say Merry Christmas and just act like it's no big deal and just kind of like intimate and mix in with all these like, Christian holiday. And then those be like, relax, what's the big deal? Okay, I'll tell you what the big deal is. Allah said in the Quran, تَكَادُ السَّمَاوَاتُ يَتَفَطَّرْنَ مِنْهُ وَتَنْشَقُّ الْأَرْضُ وَتَخِرُّ الْجِبَالُ. It's as if the heavens were about to split open and the mountains were about to crumble because they said Allah has a son. That's how weighty this thing is, right? And the Christmas is all about just celebrating that. So you're just celebrating that. And other pagan holidays like Valentine's Day, it's all based on shirk. You're just celebrating. You're like, what's the big deal? Stop being so serious. Well, the thing is, brother or sister, if you read the Quran and you place it within its place of sacredness and you see how serious these ayat are, then maybe you would be serious too, and you wouldn't take this as just, a joke. There's a big difference between that person, by the way, who's like, stop being so serious. Big difference between that person and someone who maybe does these things and just feels guilty about it, or feels like they don't know what else to do and feel uncomfortable about it. Now that person is not taking it in jest. That person is not making a mockery of it. That person is just figuring out how to navigate being a Muslim in America. But as long as they're worried about it and they're concerned about it and they're trying to change it and they feel guilty, that person doesn't fall under this cat. It's the person who wants to normalize it. And the person who wants to make it okay, that person is making a mockery, essentially, of what is being said throughout the Quran.
Jazakallah khair, mashallah, great examples there. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and give us tawfiq to be always on the straight path. With that, we'll end today's session. We'll continue the study of this surah next Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Sadaqallahul azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Allahu Akbar.